So if you're dealing with stuff, please just find a safe person to go talk to and get out of this cycle. Because I know if I would have opened up to people, that none of what I tell you next would have ever happened.
Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and today we've got one of those interview episodes for you. And, if you've been following me for a while, you know that one of the main tenets of the work that I hope to do with everybody and the change I'm hoping to create in the entire addiction approach that we have is that there is no one recovery story, that actually there are hundreds and maybe thousands of different variations, and that there's no right way to do this, right? There's no way that works for everyone. I wouldn't even know if there's a way that works for most people. What's important is for each one of us to find the unique approach, the mix of what is available that works for us. And I think you'll agree after you listen to today's interview that Rob's story is completely different than mine. He's incredibly open-minded and helps people in the same way that I do. So we ended up in somewhat similar endpoints, but we definitely didn't get here the same way. And so, I really want to use today's episode and some future interviews that we'll do with people as we have to open your mind up to what is possible. You're going to hear a lot more discussion of God. You're going to get a lot more of kind of this white lightning moment than I had in my own story. And it is all good, right? The point is not to prove what is right and what is wrong. The point is to help you all discover the path for yourself and for people close to you to find recovery and find the best life that you can live. So, without further ado, since this is about an hour-long interview, and this is the Friday episodes are the ones that you normally get to keep short, I'm going to go right into the interview itself. I hope you enjoy it. As usual, I'd love for you to tag me, send me a message on Instagram at Dr. Adi Jaffe or at ignited.me or both of us, and let me know what resonated, what parts did you like about the interview, what felt to you like it contributed, what parts of Rob's story really resonated with you. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're loving this podcast, don't forget to leave us a review and a rating on iTunes. They love it. Thank you all so much. See you on the flip side. All right, everybody. Welcome to the interview portion of today. I'm really excited to bring to you Rob Lohman, who, a lot of the people that I meet in the industry have their own personal story, and Rob is no different. And if you've listened to me for a while, you know that I really believe in sharing as many different recovery stories as we can, if for no other reason than for some of you to be able to hear a story that resonates with you, either the path up to now or maybe the example of where somebody has gotten themselves to that you want to as well. And so I'm really, really happy to bring Rob along and not only share his story, but talk about what he does and how it's a little different than what I do and a little different than what a lot of other people that you normally listen to in recovery do. So welcome, Rob.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to be on the other end of this. So
I know, totally. So, we were talking a little bit about your story. Why don't you share with everybody what got you engaged, what got you interested in becoming somebody who's on this path? It's not an easy path of getting in there and helping people who struggle with addiction.
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, the journey most of us go on is different, but there's a core kind of theme that goes on there, right? My wife has a counselor friend that she really likes, and she always says that addiction is the inability to deal with emotional pain.
Yeah.
And I would totally agree with that. Is it's a big cover up that we have to deal with really what's going on inside. And, my story is just a massive roller coaster, like a lot of people in addiction. I grew up in a great family, mom and dad, love the Lord, and we went to church and just kind of all those things. But, I was that kid that took the flask on like the Young Life ski trip,
How old were you when you started drinking?
Started at 14.
Oh, me too.
Yeah. And I don't even know, like, if there was like, some people say like, well, what was the moment? What was that traumatic experience or something? But for me, I was wired differently. Alcohol was around a lot of our family activities, and it just looked appealing. So,
sorry, I'm going to ask questions, Brock, because I'm really intrigued. So when you say you can't identify a traumatic moment, totally get that. Do you remember the first time you got drunk?
Yeah. I mean, at 14, I remember it was actually at a youth event, and back in Fort Worth, Texas. And one of the guys that came to the event just reached out to me and said, "Hey, Rob," or "Hey, Lohman." Everybody called me Lohman. That's my last name. But like, "Hey, Lohman, you want to go drink a couple beers?" And I was like, "Sure." 2 girls, 6-pack of beer, and a buddy. So I remember just walking through the brush in the backyard of I won't mention their name, the family's name that was hosting this. They didn't know what was going on. They're really good Christian people, but I just remember walking through those like tall bushes and just sitting back there with him and these 2 girls. And for me, it was kind of like, cracking the top of the can and just chugging it.
Yeah.
Three beers down just like that. And all 3 of them like nursed their beer. And it was just like something for me, like spiritual happened that night where I was like, oh, wow, this is what I've been looking for.
Yeah. I identify with the feeling a lot. Were you really, what was your social life before that moment? Were you really good with people? Did you get along with girls really well? What was it like before?
Yeah, I was like that goofy kid with, braces and glasses. And I was a kid that like knocked on your door, and I was selling either magazines or peanuts or something for some kind of like club or whatever. And it was just like, all right, Rob, what are you selling now? So I was very outgoing and funny and just kind of the center of attention.
Cool. All right. So that day at 14, if you're anything like me, you're like, oh my God, wait, there's something that makes me even more comfortable with people, where I actually, it alleviates that kind of internal noise that I've had that I didn't know how to get rid of. Cool. So you keep moving forward.
Yeah. And there was a lot of insecurities I had. So I think, like me being like the class clown or the goofy kid, I was covering stuff up, but I had no clue what it was. But but really from like 14 until 29, I mean, just insert crazy story. And that was what I did, I went to college to become a doctor because my grandpa, who never drank alcohol in his entire life, I just wanted to be just like Papa. And that was my dream, was to be a family practice doctor just like him. And in the journey of that, you go away to college. And I mean, I was already gambling a bunch, I was sleeping around. Anything to take me out of who I was, because I don't know, I just didn't like what was going on. But when you're around drinking and drugs and partying all the time, you always have those couple friends that are worse off than you are, that make you look good, But senior year of high school, I was getting drunk before I went to swim practice, and I was a really good swimmer, but alcohol, I would say alcohol always takes and kicks potential's bottom every time you put it in a room together. And so alcohol always trumped potential any point in my life.
Got it.
And so when I went to college, and I was just, the fraternity guy, and running around just doing what I wanted. Almost got kicked out of college twice my first semester, just due to a drunken thing and other destructive behaviors.
So I have a question. I've spoken a lot at Greek events and things of that nature. I was never part of the Greek system myself, but to me, there was a sense, and there's probably a middle ground between the 2 ends to the spectrum that I'm about to describe. But there were the people like me. I was like the goth, the weird kid, yellow hair or whatever. And my act of rebellion was a way of finding other people who were rebelling against what was standard, because I never felt like I could fit it. So I knew I could never be the jock. And I don't know if that was even true, but in my head, that's what I knew. And so I went the exact other way, right? Like I was trench coat mafia before there were ever shootings in schools. Like nobody had ever shot anybody in school, but I would walk around with sunglasses and a trench coat at school, and had friends who did the same. And we'd listen to heavy metal and like, we were so over the top rejecting of other people that we knew nobody would get close to us. That was kind of the idea. So we could only hang out on ourselves. That I always saw that as one extreme.
Right.
Then, like I said, I'm sure there's a huge crowd in the middle of people who just kind of felt like they fit in, but not really or whatever. And they play that game. And then I saw the Greek system as a place for the people who they were really committed to having a solid group of friends, to fitting in, to doing what was expected. I used to look down at that when I was in college, but now I understand it as a system that's made almost like it's like the fast track to trying to be the popular, run of the mill sort of guy that we all expect for men, obviously, and the same for women on the other side. Was that your experience? Like being part of the Greek system allowed you almost like a ticket to the show in a way that it wouldn't have allowed if you didn't become part of the Greek system?
Not so much. I mean, I was like friends with everybody. So I was like, friends with the jocks, the geeks, the whatever, the lost, the found. But the college I went to, it was like 92% Greek.
Wow.
So it was 2,500 student liberal art college. So it was almost like going there. Like I knew I was going to be a part of the fraternity system because I like to party, and that's what I saw.
Okay.
And my brother was in the fraternity there. And I remember looking at colleges, like I didn't even want to go to the college I went to because my mom went there, my uncle went there, my aunt went there, my brother was going there. And I'm like, I don't typically like to follow kind of like the crowd, but when I'm in the crowd, I don't feel comfortable either. And so I was like, I'm not going to this school at all. But I went there on a Sunday, and I stayed through like a Thursday or something. But it was this big fraternity week, and it was party time everywhere. I mean, I was like chugging fifths of tequila just to fit in and be like cool guy.
And you're like 18.
Oh yeah, I was like drunk the whole time, and I'm like, I'm going to college here, and that's where I ended up going to school. And somehow I graduated in 4 years. I remember the day of graduation, the morning of graduation, I didn't even know if I was going to graduate.
Yeah, I didn't.
But both, so it was there for you. But it was like, both sets of grandparents were there. My aunts and uncles, everyone from Fort Wayne came down to, Greencastle, Indiana. And it was like all my relatives are there, but I didn't tell anyone. Like I did not know if I was going to graduate.
Yeah.
I'm like 215 pounds. I went to college 150 pounds, totaled my car in a drunk driving accident before my senior year and just ballooned up. And so I like looked like this totally different guy that, I was like a completely different person. But that morning of graduation, I'm just like, I'm waiting for the call from my biology professor. And he finally calls me and he's like, Lohman, get to my office now. And I'm thinking, I'm not graduating. Like his tone was just like a disappointed father,
Yep.
Just like now. And I go over there to him and he pulls out this 5-page test and he starts looking through it. He's like, do you know what your grade was on the final? And I'm like, man, I know I studied. And when I study hard, I get good grades. But I was like, this doesn't sound like when he goes, 98, turns the page. 99, turns the page. And he gets through all 5 pages. He goes, this is the highest grade I have ever had in all my years of teaching on a final. What the hell have you been doing this entire school year? And I was like, dang, I just said, okay, well, did I graduate? That's all I cared about. He said, yep. And I just took off and went to the ceremony like a couple hours later or something. But I knew I was a smart guy. It was the problem of applying myself and believing in myself because I really got lost.
I want to pause here because, a lot of people identify with the partying in college or partying during that time in life. But there's a thing that is missing from the conversation that I'd love to get into. You said when you were younger, you didn't realize, you didn't understand what any of the angst you were running away from was. And by the way, some of these things are biological, right? Some of them are genetic and epigenetic changes. Especially, you said there was a lot of alcohol in your family. For all you know, your mom drank when she was pregnant, or there was other kind of stuff happening that changes our biology. So I think I think that's an important thing to say, because not everything we're going to talk about is either conscious or psychological. Some of it is environmental and biological.
Yeah.
But in terms of the psychology, here you are, and I was in the same boat. Somebody who can do well when you put your mind to it, but you just don't. Most of the time, you just don't. You take the way of, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to go get drunk. Talk a little bit about what it was like to have to be in that experience. What were you thinking before nights of going out drinking? What role did that play for you internally?
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say, like my mom comes from a long line of alcoholics, and so I know like for her, like alcohol was just kind of this thing that she didn't care about like at all. You know, it was kind of like the opposite of just like, she was really loving and enabling and pampering and those kind of things. She's like that sweet little mom that everyone just loves, Nancy. And so for her, alcohol was a complete turnoff. But also being authentic was a turnoff too. And I think a lot of my life, my dad, he's an amazing guy. We have an amazing relationship now. He didn't have a lot of confidence in himself and his own journey of life as well, as he has said. But it was like, he wasn't like leading me a lot like in my life. And I used to use that as an excuse. Well, my dad didn't teach me this, and later on, but it wasn't him, it was me. And so I lived this life, I say, of like false narratives of ideas of myself that I had created.
Yeah.
And therefore I became this chameleon throughout most of my life, where it was like, oh, well, I'm going to act differently around Sarah, that I'm going to act differently around, Fred's grandparents. And so I was really good at manipulating that.
So I think that's my question, right? And I'm putting the cart before the horse here, but like in my work, I literally got off of a client session from the car before we got on this. And one of my biggest pieces of advice for almost everybody I work with is figure out who you are and then be the most authentic version of that.
Yeah.
Instead of constantly pretending for everybody. So I know what made me pretend. What made me pretend back then is I was pretty damn sure that I sucked, and that if people found out, if people knew who I really was and what I really cared about and what I really wanted, that they would all leave in droves. Not like I had droves of friends, but that everybody would just stay away from me. So I was a chameleon to the best of my ability to try to be who I thought they wanted me to be. What was your sense? You're in the Greek system, you're in this college, you're drinking all the time, you're not putting work into things, but when you are, it's paying off. What was your, how was your head talking to you during that time?
Oh, wow. Well, I think as you and I had talked, like when you were on my show, a while ago, it's, when you start drinking at 14, like as a young man, my brain doesn't stop developing until I'm 26.
Yeah.
So in the midst of the drinking, the drugs, the manipulation, all those things, I don't even know if I knew who I was. But what I did know is I didn't like who I was. I didn't like the fact that I would get drunk and, sleep with someone and, just leave them in the fraternity room, and I'd go back out and like party with people.
You see, here's what I love about this discussion. You didn't love that.
No, but I did it.
But you did it, and you were in a system that supported it. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, to 100%. Yeah.
I always joke, it's like, because I dated a girl in a sorority when I was in college, and sororities were not allowed to have alcohol on the premises. Fraternities used the funds from their dues to buy the alcohol for the parties. So just a system that was set up to like, hey girls, what are you going to do on the weekend? You're going to go to the fraternities because that's where the drinking and the parties, you get in for free. And then it caused, again, I'll just be frank, this kind of pseudo sexual assault-ish world where, I'm not saying girls weren't going in there knowing what they're getting themselves into, but the system was set up to almost like pressure this, like, get fucked up, get laid, get fucked up, get laid sort of environment. So you're in that system. And in my head, like I was saying, I was always fighting against that system, but with other drugs and with alcohol also, I never thought the girls would ever want to have sex with me. So I was like always looking for the way to get laid. So it's really interesting from two different directions of the exact same problem.
Yeah.
These substances help us either get over the things we do that we don't like, or become versions of ourselves that we can deal with better.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I said, that emotional pain, right? It's like, you are in this thing and that's just what you do. And granted, like in the fraternity system and stuff, I mean, there's guys that they were laser focused on their studies and that's what they were there. They weren't into the scene. And there were guys in our fraternity house that were like that. And they weren't into the party and the drinking and the drugs and sleeping around and stuff, but they were really focused on what they wanted, and those were the guys you were just like, there's like a party, like, I think I'll just like, maybe I'll just stay and hang out with so-and-so tonight. But like, nah, somebody brought a handle, let's go get drunk. And that was a sad cycle, and then it was, when I graduated college and didn't know what I wanted to do, obviously wasn't going to become a doctor because my grades weren't great and I wasn't focused. So I did what any logical person after the parents basically spent, like $125,000 on my college education. So I moved out to Vail, Colorado for a year and a half, and the cycle continued, and then it was, okay, a year and a half came up and I promised my parents I'd get a big boy job. So I moved back to Texas, get a big boy job, go get my MBA because I wanted to be more marketable. But yet I still went out 8 nights a week and partied all the time, maintained a good job. I was physically fit. I mean, I would go run half marathons or races the day after a big party, and I'd still run, 6.5, 6-minute miles. So, but that's just what you did. So my whole environment and people that are stuck in this environment, like I didn't really want to go get drunk that night, but it was just what we did.
Yeah.
It's like, even today,
that's the environmental pressure. It's real.
Yeah, it is. But it's like doing the things I don't really want to do, but it's just like what we did. And so finally, life began to change. And I really started hating what I was doing. I mean, my gambling was getting crazy. I ended up getting married to another good alcoholic in 99. And it was like our relationship was not built on healthy things. It was, sex and drinking, and because I started drinking at such a young age, and because, I didn't value a good relationship with a woman, my intimacy levels from an emotional standpoint were very shallow.
Yeah.
Like I had a hard time getting deep. I had several girlfriends that were just like, we just feel like we're just kind of blah. Like there's no depth here.
Right.
And I didn't know how to go.
I think that's an important thing, for a lot of us, a lot of guys, we learn about sex from porn. Porn is not very deep. It doesn't teach you anything about communication in relationships. Then you get a bunch of guys who are, pseudo competitive amongst each other. The thing that's supported is sports and kind of achievement in that sense. Not a lot of conversations about other than the things you have to do. It's not about how do you feel. It's what do you have to do. I grew up in a family that supported that anyway. And then we get into relationships and we expect our relationships to look the same way that our friendships looked, or that our, porn viewing and kind of like Playboy time or whatever looked. And so we act that out. And I think the experience you're talking about having with girlfriends is a really common one. It's just most couples then just break up instead of figuring out how to be intimate and how to have intimacy. Is you just keep breaking up, and the men blame it on the women blame it on the men. And in the meantime, nobody's learning how to communicate.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing that was critical in my, I don't know, call it sexual maturity or just feeling comfortable with who I was and how my body was I remember one time, and I didn't realize this until much later in my life, but this was an impactful time. So people that are listening, that have kids and talk about, we always see like bullying and stuff like that in our society now today. I remember I was at a youth camp, Christian youth camp, and it's not like you go to a Christian youth camp, everyone's like good person, but I remember just right before we got on the bus to take off where we were going, it was like a lot of us had to go to the bathroom, so we go find a tree and take a whiz and get back on the bus. And I remember one of the guys, I won't actually mention his name, but I remember one of the guys that he said, was telling everyone that I didn't have any like pubic hair. And it was like, was it the age where you didn't necessarily have pubic hair anyway? But he said this thing. And all I remember, it's like, imagine turning your head around like right now and seeing all these people looking at you and singing this song. May not even have been the song they sang or the volume. But what I heard was, Robbie was a bear. Robbie has no hair. And it was like all these like faces like laughing at you, like, like a cartoon. And I was like, that totally annihilated me.
Yeah.
As a kid.
And that's, I think it's important, right? Everybody has their version of these kinds of moments.
Right.
And the reason they're important for us to actually talk about is, if you listen to Gabor Mate or any of those guys that talk about trauma, there's big trauma, like big T trauma, and there's these little micro experiences that just feel really terrifying. Like I lied like a motherfucker when I was a kid to try to impress my friends about shit that makes no sense. Like any normal human being would understand that I was lying.
Yeah.
But I wanted so badly to be good enough for my friends and to be popular enough and for them to think that I'm cool. I made up a whole different life.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing something similar that kind of happened to you. And to me, that those stories are important in the understanding of why we leaned on our drinking more heavily.
Yeah, definitely was, and so like just those micro moments throughout my journey, they all add up. And the more you stay in it and stay in this lie and this chameleon lifestyle, you get to a point where you break. Something happens. Something's got to change, right? And so my breaking moment was June 7th, 2001 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And for the couple months like leading up to this moment, I was dealing with a lot of suicide ideation. I would be driving down the highway in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I would all of a sudden literally see my car, and I'm not drinking. It's the day after, whatever, but I would see my car veer off. I'm still driving straight, but I would see my car veer off to the left and hit like a median in the middle of the highway.
Like you
and I would literally
imagine it and see it happen.
Oh yeah, and I could see myself dead. And I've heard people say, well, if you see it happening, usually people kind of come out of that moment before they actually see their body dead. But I would actually see myself like dead, bleeding, and they're like, that's what I know now as called suicide ideation. Mm-hmm. I had no clue what was going on then.
Yeah,
but I sure wasn't telling anyone about it, because if I told you, you would say, dude, like, I'm not going out with you. Like, what if you make that a reality one night, right? Yeah. Which happens with a lot of people. It's not planned. It just happens. So for me, what happened that night was June 7th, 2001. I was hanging out in a bar in Fort Wayne, Indiana, partying every night like I did, and just went out, and all of a sudden, like the music and everything just got completely dead silent in the bar. And I audibly heard the words, "You're done." And then the music got really loud again. So my spiritual experience in that moment was I looked at my friend Sean O'Brien and I was like, dude, I got to go home. I don't know what just happened, but I think I'm done drinking. And he laughs because like any of us were ever going to quit drinking, right? But I was driving home that night, and it was like I was sober, but I was drunk.
What do you mean?
In this deep contemplative state of like, wow, I think my prayers were just answered. Like, I'm done drinking. But I was drunk, so I'm like having a hard time driving home, right? But so my mind is spinning in a more, wow, my life might be getting ready to change, but I'm still trying to make it home without wrecking my car. And I end up getting home, and I had about 15 stairs up to the top of my little 1-bedroom apartment with a workout gym in the living room, like all good bachelors have. And all of a sudden I realized, next thing I know, I've got 350 pounds on a barbell, and I'm laying on my workout bench. And I pick that barbell up off the rack, and I unhinge my elbows and drop it, ready to just take myself out of the game, I guess.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. And these are like lightning speed milliseconds, right, that are happening. But what I remember was, as I unhinged my elbows, the bar did not drop all the way down. And for me, I couldn't even bench that much weight. But what I feel happened is I feel like God put his hand on that bar and held it for just a moment. And my dog, Jake, I had a yellow Labrador, and he was nudging my knee and looking at me with those puppy dog eyes, just tilting his head like side to side, like curiosity, like, Dad, what are you doing? And I was like, oh my gosh, who's going to feed you tomorrow? And then I started thinking about my parents and all this good stuff, my brother, all these positive things in my life. And I just believed that God was like, okay, you done? All right. And put the bar back on the rack. And I can see it happening as I tell you the story. Mm. And what I remember and what I felt that night was I felt like the power of God wrapping his arms around me and saying, you're going to be all right. And with his strength,
moment, man.
Oh yeah, with his strength, I went into my kitchen, and I say we because I couldn't have done this with my own strength. As I poured out 2 full bottles of good scotch that I was a scotch drinker, up to like 2 bottles a day is what I was drinking, just doing sales and marketing. So I was like a productive, quote unquote, functioning alcoholic, but my world involved saturation of alcohol. And that was like the most peaceful night of sleep I had in what I feel like decades, but just a very, very, very long time. And I woke up that next morning, I just knew that my life was going to be better and different. Wow. And it was incredible. And I made that phone call to my parents. I meant to call my Aunt Carol, who's now passed, just an amazing saint, amazing woman. She'd been sober like 20 plus years, lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But I accidentally called my parents. And I don't remember a lot of that call, but what my mom says happened was I called and said, Mom, I need help. I can't quit drinking and gambling. And she says that, we just cried for an hour. Mm. And that was her answered prayer. So moms, dads, don't ever stop praying for your kids. If that's your avenue of prayer. And that morning, my aunt came and picked me up, and she took me to my first 12-step recovery meeting, where she parked on the curb. We walked through the galley from the front of the bar all the way to the back of this bar, and there was an AA meeting in the back of the bar. And that was my first recovery meeting, and people were happy, laughing, loving life. And I was like, last night I tried to end my life, and I just hook, line, and sinker. I jumped into the recovery world, and I didn't go through detox. I haven't had a craving in 18 years. And it's just that part of my substance abuse was gone. There was other stuff to work on, but
sure,
in 18 years, I've never once thought about putting alcohol or a drug in my body or a cigarette.
You know what I love about this story is I talk a lot about what the kind of people who, when they're ready to quit, when they're ready to get help, they're not ready to quit. You're telling me that the moment it hit you, you were done.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like you had to fight the notion that you don't drink anymore. It was like it just came to you, and you just changed.
Yeah, I mean, it was a divine moment for me, because I couldn't have done it on my own power, that's for sure. But I mean, I'm a very small percentage of people that happens to. That now I want to say that there were other addictions that stayed the course. But the substance abuse that covered up the pain in that regards, that was completely removed.
Are you talking about like sex and intimacy and stuff like that, or gambling?
More gambling. Yeah. My intimacy struggles continued because I didn't know how to have a deep relationship with a woman,
sure.
Or even deep relationships with male friends of mine, just because I don't have like childhood friends that are still my friends today. Like, there was an old movie with Mark Wahlberg, and he was playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, if you remember that movie at all. And it was like he had this core group of dudes that he like grew up with. They beat each other up. Yep. They were friends their whole life. And I just didn't have that.
Mm.
So now relationships are extremely important to me. Before, it was just kind of, there wasn't a lot of depth.
Yeah. You know what I love about this is a lot of people don't experience these sort of momentary changes that you discuss, but some people do. And what I think is important for people to understand is it doesn't matter how you get there. Whether it's gradual progress and kind of finding a better and better, closer and closer to where you want to end up path, or it happens in an instant. It doesn't matter, because the end point is what we're going for. The point we're going for is the life you have now, which is, obviously part of what you do is help a lot of people who are struggling themselves. But my guess is, if you're anything like me and like so many of the other people that I work with, once you discover that there's this opportunity to work on who you are and keep becoming a better version of Rob, you kind of get excited by it. You go, oh my God, well, what else can I learn? What else can I incorporate in? How else can I become a better person?
Yeah. And that was my big thing when I got sober. I mean, I literally, a few days afterwards, I took my, one of those big, like 300-pound televisions, right? I remember taking my TV, any magazines I shouldn't have had, any music that was not positive music. I remember taking that and literally going out and throwing it all in the trash. Like I was literally throwing stuff in the dumpster. And I'm sure my neighbors probably thought I was crazier then than I was then. But I was like, you know what? I just want all positive things in my life. And I was Mr. Recovery for several years after that. It was just kind of like I was part of all the recovery stuff. And I got out of doing sales and marketing and started working with a career counselor and just started finding myself. But later on, as I have so many, not straight points in my life. It's this kind of big roller coaster avenue here. Hold on 2 seconds. I'm gonna turn my email off. Sorry, it keeps. I don't know if you can hear it, but it keeps going off on my end, and I don't want it to continue. Yeah. Okay. But it was, my journey has just not been straight in career directions or things. So once I started finding myself, I started moving in a more positive direction, right? And became an 8th grade algebra teacher, and then I became a college career counselor, and then I bought an RV and was going to travel the country to make a documentary about why people love what they do and all this amazing stuff. And so I wrote a book and published my first book and went to Rome and ran a marathon in early recovery. And people actually sent money to me to help pay for that. That used to just take, right? And so I had some strategic relocations. But one of the big things was I want to throw out there is that when I got sober, when I became sober, I was not, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. Right. And eventually I ended up meeting my wife as I was working on putting on this humongous, 3-day Christian music festival in Colorado. She ended up working for the largest Christian radio station in the world. And we connected, and we got married, and it was a rocky start. And when I've realized as of recent, we created a lot of these false narratives early on in our marriage. Yeah. Which are, I think, why a lot of couples split and cut bait and run and go find someone else. But until those are exposed, you don't really know what the struggles were. So we struggled during our marriage in the beginning. And then we had my son, Zeke, who's an amazing 12-year-old boy now. And eventually had my daughter, who turns 10 in a couple days. But in that, I started a business too. And now, being a father, a new role, being a husband, a new, better role than my first short-lived marriage, and being an entrepreneur, a lot of pressures there that I was not mentally and emotionally mature enough to handle. And after about 3 years in 2012, I ended up having a major mental breakdown. I lost my business in 2011 just due to sales and production numbers. The false things we were talking about before, those messages, I just felt like I was failing as a husband. I was failing as a father. I failed as a businessman. All these, I call them spiritual attacks, were just so loud in my head. And I wasn't telling anyone about them. And my gambling was just crazy, out of control too. And my suicide ideation was just screaming in my brain, right? But I wasn't telling anyone because I didn't want my wife to feel like I was more of a loser than I convinced myself I was. Yeah. So it was this dark morass, just the morass of self-pity, is what one of the literatures I read talks about. But I was in a very, very, very dark place. I wasn't me at all. And I hated who I was.
And that all happened in recovery.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is important for people to hear, right? People want the path to be so direct. This is, by the way, part of the reasons that I talk in the Abstinence Myth about we need to stop measuring recovery by only amount of days sober in a row is there's a lot of other stuff to work on, man. And I know a lot of people with 15, 20 years who if they start paying attention to other areas of their life, they would recognize that there's this mountain, this iceberg of things that are just waiting to get paid attention to. Yeah. And what I'm hearing is for you, that negative voice was still really present. And by the way, that's part of what we have to fight, right? Is that constant imposter voice in our head. And so you found yourself in this really dark spot, but now no alcohol use anymore. And what allowed you to, or what did you have to do to get out of that?
Yeah. It's interesting. I look at the sign over your shoulder. It says, why not go out on a limb? That's where the fruit is.
Yeah.
And as I just was reading that, I'm like, I cut the limb off the tree. My tree, my roots, those things was recovery meetings, was mentors, was Bible studies, was people I cared about in my life that I was open to the extent I was able to be honest about,
Yeah.
But I'm looking at that, I'm like, yeah, I cut the limb off the tree and it was just dying.
So, the way I read that quote, it's about, you got to take risks because the risks are where the payoff is. Right. And I think you bring up an important point, which is a lot of people in recovery get so scared of trying out things because look, we fucked ourselves up before. Like we know that sometimes those risks carry a lot of negative consequences. And so we end up in a place where we just say, like you said, we cut the limb off. We just say, you know what, I'd rather not even try. The problem is that makes us die inside.
Yeah.
And so, the reason I put that out there is a lot of people that I work with, it's almost funny, like as I try to describe it here, at first they're on every limb. All they do is live on the limbs. They don't even know where their trunk is.
Right. Yeah.
They're going to like the skinny, tiny little limbs in the end. I'm not going to say his name, but one of my clients who was describing to me, he hasn't had a job in a long time. And he's describing to me this work that he used to do because I guess somebody got in touch with him before. And he kind of served as a low-level collector for these guys who, like loan sharks.
Yeah.
I go, yeah, thank you for the story. Let's stay as far away from that kind of job as we possibly can. And he was intoxicated when he was texting with me. So he goes, I'm not in it anymore, but why? I go, because there's no way up. You are always causing pain to other people left and right. That is your job. Mm-hmm. And lastly, in order to work in that job, you have to have people around you who are shady. And inevitably, shady shit will happen to you. And it's just, obviously, for those of us who are on this side of the train tracks, it all just makes sense. Like, why on earth would you want a job like that? But when we're stuck in the middle, when we're in the worst of it, like I said, we'll go out on any limb. Like, well, maybe there's a tree all the way at the end of that. Maybe there's a leaf or some piece of fruit that I can collect.
Yeah.
Then we retract and we get so insular and so isolated that we go, okay, fuck it. I can't do anything other than recovery work. That's all I got.
Yeah.
Everything else is dangerous. And by the way, some of the programs or some sponsors will reinforce that, because they say to you, this is the most important thing in your life is you got to do this. And there are times where that's true. And there are times where you got to go, okay, how do I expand? How do I become the better version of me? And sometimes, unfortunately, that does include risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I love, the coaching I do now to help people, I talk a lot about that with people too, because we don't want to live in the shame-based recovery mindset, right? If I don't do this, I'm going to. It's like, well, no, if we do this, we can, right? If we do these things, we can do instead of like, oh, I can't just do this. So for me at the end, I'll share this with people because I think it's good for people to hear because I didn't know anyone else that dealt with this outside of me at this time, but now I know lots of people that do, which brought me comfort later on. But at the end of my, like right before all this happened, I was literally, we talk about self-harming ourselves. Some people do it by pounding a bunch of booze, doing a bunch of heroin, just whatever it is, right? We find something that takes us out of that, gives us that pain relief. But for me, some people cut, a lot of things. For me, I literally would like punch myself in the side of the head. And that would shock me into a moment of getting out of an emotional paralysis to just move forward with the moment to the point where like I couldn't even, if I put my glasses on,
it would hurt.
It would hurt because my temple was very tender. But I didn't tell anybody this. And so if you're dealing with stuff, please just find a safe person to go talk to and get out of this cycle. Because I know if I would have opened up to people, that none of what I tell you next would have ever happened.
Yeah. But
because I was so isolated and so desperate and so hating on myself and all these things, one night I was just sitting at home on, it was February 14th, 2012. Family had gone to bed. We had a good Valentine's Day, or whatever. But there were so many things firing in my life, driving my subconscious that were just negative, negative, negative. And it was almost like, as a guy, being able to put like this area of my life in this compartment back here in my brain, and then works in the front of the brain, and just all these different compartments. It's almost like something just wiped all those walls out, and I just flipping lost it. You know, and I ended up getting up off my couch to go organize my townhouse, which was in complete disarray. Another story why it was that way. But like, I did not do well with clutter, but I did not know I did not do well with clutter.
Okay.
I'd watched a movie earlier that night, a very inspirational movie, but what I took away was all the negative stuff of the movie, which was about, you're not good enough. You know, and I, in being a gambler and all those things too, you're very impulsive and reactive, and you don't think, and you're just kind of like boom, 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 and you just go. So in a moment of just not even being, I'd say, even present with who I was, and in a mental blackout and just a collapse of all senses, I ended up grabbing a box of matches. And then the next thing I knew, my patio was on fire. And I had set my patio on fire in my townhouse community early in the morning. Not something you can stop. And once I came to and kind of realized what I did, I couldn't stop it.
Wow.
And so I had to run upstairs and rip my daughter, my wife, out of her bed. Like, honey, the house is on fire, just screaming, like, get the kids. And so she gets my daughter, who's 2, out of her crib, and I get my son, who's 4, out of his bed, and we run downstairs. And, you know, obviously we called the fire department and like reported it and said, hey, your house is on fire. But I go wake my neighbors up. My wife's putting the kids' boots on because it's February, it's cold. The fire's still outside. You know, and then when I come back in, and like I was beating on doors, we ended up walking out the front of the door. You know, in my opinion, it was almost like, you know, God was like holding the fire back and saying, get out. And right when we walked out the front door, the whole entire patio exploded. It melted the gas meter, and just, it was a huge fire.
Wow.
And, you know, as an addict and a gambler and stuff like that, your mind quickly goes into cover this up. How you going to, you know, like, you know, it's like the protect yourself mode.
Sure.
So, I mean, long story short, from that moment to later, it was like so many God miracles happened in our life, like amazing things you couldn't write down in your life story, you know, positive things, a lot of hurtful things. Fortunately, nobody got hurt in this whole process at all. Thank God. Just property damage, I say, but it's people's memories. It's like, you know, we lost almost everything in our townhouse, and our neighbors lost some things as well. And then fear spread throughout your community, right? Because of my actions.
Yeah.
And I hope one day God will put me in front of these people to apologize. But it started an immediate road to healing. I ran back to recovery. I ran back to church. I ran back to people that discipled me and mentored me. You know, I ended up confessing to what I did because I couldn't go through my life. I probably could have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
Because no one saw me do it.
Yeah. Okay. We have a couple minutes left, and there's just one or two things that I want to touch on. You consider yourself an addict. Like, when you talk about yourself,
at this point in my life, I don't consider myself an addict per se, because I think that's a mindset that keeps a lot of people stuck in that. I look at myself as a child of God that's been forgiven and healed for my addictions at this point that I've worked on. And so I don't ever want to go back and try that out. Say, hey, can I drink again? Because I don't want to know.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm healed from those in my gambling addiction world, because I've done a lot of work around that too.
Love that. I think, man, these terms we use about ourselves sometimes keep us stuck. And I think that's an important message to get to a lot of people. Yeah. And then lastly, the thing that I'm hearing is this balance. So you came from a pretty religious background.
Yeah.
And that was a safe spot for you later on in your recovery as well.
Yeah.
And when you were ready, or when, you know, you had external forces kind of telling you, hey, it's time to get back to work, you went back to some of the same work that originally helped you, but you had a different resolve about you. Like, you were willing to talk about things that you hadn't been willing to talk about before.
Yeah. Vulnerability, transparency. I mean, I spent 10 and a half months of a 13-year sentence behind bars. Spent 11 months in a halfway house. My wife stayed with me. We worked through all that. We continue to work through things. And
that's for the arson?
Yeah. 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 And I mean, the way that things unfolded with getting into a halfway house with a charge that they don't let into halfway houses, it was just, it was just miracle after miracle. And so I believe for me that that's the foundation of my life. I'm not identified by you, my wife. I'm identified by who I am inside. And that's what keeps me going forward, and why I do intervention work, and why I do recovery coaching, and why I work with people one-on-one. Just being vulnerable and transparent.
I love it. Okay. So we're going to have to wrap this up, but I think I want to put down kind of the takeaways that I have from, because here's what I love about this, right? Our two stories couldn't be more different, which I love. I work with a lot of people whose stories are completely different than my own. And the notion that everybody's recovery has to look like mine is just insane. In the same way that the notion that everybody's recovery would have to look like yours would be crazy. But there are some elements that are consistent across them that I hear. And that is, get honest, get transparent, get vulnerable as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
You're not going to be perfect at it because you don't even know right now. If you're in the middle of hiding from everybody all the time, you don't even know what real transparency looks like. So don't worry about it. Just get as transparent and vulnerable as you can right now, immediately. Let 1 layer, 2 layers, 15 layers off. Let's just start there. There's always going to be more, but start there. That's number 1. Number 2, find the environment, find the context that feels good and safe for you. For you, it was church and God. I'm not religious, so it wasn't that for me. For me, it was science and school and psychology and learning neuroscience and genetics. Like, that's what I held on to in the beginning. Now I've moved past it. I've gotten exposed to some spiritual stuff that really excites me, but I wasn't ready for it in the beginning. Yeah. Find the thing that feels safe and go all in on that. If you can combine those two things together, get vulnerable, transparent, etc., go to the place that feels safe, you're, I think, more than halfway there. And then lastly, find a community. It doesn't have to be 12-step, as anybody who follows me knows. It does. Yeah. It can be church. It can be 12-step. It can be smart recovery. It can be just people online in a support group. It can be people in your sewing circle or a yoga community. It doesn't matter who it is, but find a community that excites you. Yeah. People that want what you want and have things you want, and people that you are excited by and are inspired by and want to follow. And my guess is, if you can do those 3 things, I don't know, I can't say you're in the clear. As you pointed out, life will come at you. But if you have those 3 things in place, no matter what comes at you, you have tools that will allow you to recorrect over and over and over. I almost got divorced because I didn't realize I had this intimacy stuff happen when I got clean from my drug and alcohol use, when I stopped using. So I had more work to do, but I had tools and I had transparency and I had vulnerability in a way that I never had when I was using, in the middle of all of it, that allowed me to get through it more quickly the second time around. So, again, find the transparency and vulnerability as quickly as you can. Find a place you feel safe. It doesn't matter what it is, but you got to find a place where you feel safe. And then last but not least, hopefully within that place, but if not, find a community that serves you. And with those tools, you can withstand and flourish and persevere through almost anything in life and come out winning, right? Come out not just having handled your addiction, because that sucks. You don't want to just not be using anymore. Life would suck if that's as good as you could get it. You want to come to a place where you're flourishing.
Yeah, totally agree. And when I speak to men's groups and get invited to speak and share my story and connect with them, that idea of being vulnerable, they see that, hey, it's really not that bad. Like, you can do this, and it's cool to encourage people. That's why I love doing what I do and helping people move forward. So that's just get vulnerable, get real, and there's a lot of world of opportunity ahead of you.
Totally. I love it. Rob, thank you so much for being so transparent and vulnerable and sharing yourself with people here. How do people find you? What's the easiest way to find you?
Call me, 970-331-4469.
There you go.
Or they can just go to theaddictionrecoveryhub.com.
Okay.
Just see everything I do there.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for everything you do for other people. And I wish you nothing but continued success. Those of you who are in here, just screenshot this and let us know. Tag me at Dr. Adijavi, tag at ignited.me, tag Rob, and let us know what resonated from you. And because I know for sure that other people will be able to benefit from your lessons. Thank you again so much, Rob. Happy New Year. Have a great rest of your day and week.
Awesome. You too. Catch you later.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.